All right. So hopefully this view is all coming up okay. But thanks so much for joining, folks. It's an absolute pleasure to be participating in this event and getting to share and ideate with so many other sort of CS leaders and practitioners. My name is Dominic Constandi. I am the Senior Vice President of Customer Experience here at ZoomInfo. A little bit about who we are. At ZoomInfo, we believe that data drives the foundation of all go-to-market efforts, the insights, the engagement, and the intelligence. And that's no more acute than in this period of sort of accelerated digital transformation. With our platform, we help our customers discover their ideal buyer with real-time intelligence, insight-based targeting, and prioritized outreach. We then fuel their outreach with automated data enrichment, activity reporting, and integration with CRM systems and emails. And then finally, we orchestrate their go-to-market motion with AI intelligence, targeted online advertising, and custom API solutions. Now, to provide a little bit of context as to sort of the CX org here at ZoomInfo, it's made up of 4 sub-business units: customer success, customer support, a customer delivery and pro-serve function, as well as a customer onboarding and training. And that represents around 350 to 400 employees whose functional purview all fall into any of those 4 business units. Now, with all of that said, and in the absence of a handy-dandy agenda slide, I'll try to swiftly articulate what I'm going to be covering today with you all. So first, we're going to be doing a quick intro regarding a case for partners, right? Why do we need them? Why is anyone listening to me talk on this topic for 30 minutes? Next up, we're going to do a high-level look at the types of partnerships available within the broader SaaS market. From that, we're going to look at some of the questions based on fit and maturity that we ought to be asking ourselves in establishing a partnership and looking at a framework for that type of evaluation. After that, we're going to get a little more tactical, and we're going to quickly glimpse at a few basic partner onboarding motions and some quick tips about how to stay data-centric and data-driven in that effort. And then finally, we're going to close out with how we can drive continued engagement across our partner network. So with that, as promised, a case for partners, right? What do they do? Why and when might we need them? So in many instances, I think it begins with a problem, but it's a good problem. Perhaps your company's success has opened up opportunities further afield than your initial TAM, be it in terms of geography or industry or segment. And that is a case for increased reach. Or perhaps you're experiencing growth that can't be sustained or supported swiftly enough with your current internal capabilities, and that is a case for increased scale. Or perhaps you are at a juncture where leveraging a partner is more margin accretive versus margin dilutive, and thus it's a case for increased efficiency, right? So that kind of covers the 3 that we've got here on the screen. But regardless of which one or which many of the above that you might be kind of looking at or faced with, you are at a juncture where you need to survey your partner options to meet the business need. Okay, so that takes us to sort of a super high level categorization of the partner landscape. Now, in this, in the very next slide, I'm actually going to be digging deeper and getting more granular on the partner types, but bear with me as I just start at the top of the proverbial funnel here. So again, at the highest level, partners can be very broadly identified as a service, or channel partner, or a technology partner, or in some instances, both. Now, a few characteristics of a service or channel partner: they tend to be consultative. There is a delegation of work element to that partner. They do tend to actually be responsible for driving an end result, right? They own the end result. They might adhere. So here we've got ZoomInfo. They might adhere to sort of your business's standards and best practices. They could be functioning independently, or they could be working with sort of a partner manager from the side of your company. And they also actually might be a reseller of your product and services. So that tends to be kind of that services and channel partner. And we're going to dig into more of that on the next slide. But shifting over to the technology partner side, these folks can also be consultative. There might be more of a focus, though, on providing technical services and resourcing, varying from kind of a complete takeover of a particular function to more of the delivery of around sort of staff augmentation, right? These partnerships can be tactically focused with specific areas that they're looking at, or they can be part of a longer term strategic play. And as such, they can actually be spun up or wound down relatively quickly. And then finally, from a branding perspective on the technology partner side, what you often see is you have the option to kind of white label these types of partnerships under your own brand. And that's, I think, a pretty ubiquitous thing. So with that kind of super high level definition and sort of binary categorization of partners, we're going to take a quick look and we're going to sort of dive, as soon as I find my mouse, dive into sort of this handy dandy matrix we have here. So digging a layer or two down and highlighting a few, real world examples of particular partner types and some key partner parameters or factors regarding fit or suitability is kind of what we've got on this slide. Now, my particular assessment regarding some of these things and these aforementioned parameters that I've got here are written very much, figuratively in pencil, right? And are a quick representation of how I might look at partner options for my business. But these will undoubtedly vary for each business based on, what that business is looking for and its own organizational maturity. So for the sake of time and sparing you from all listening to me talk endlessly, I'm not going to cover every single box here. Rather, I'm going to touch on a few elements from each of these partner types represented in the columns, right? So we'll start from the left. So on the left, all the way on the left, you've got staff augmentation, right? Talked about that as an example in that last slide. An example here is a company like NIIT. Here there isn't a sales approach per se because there's no sort of reseller element to what they're doing. The customer mix, it can vary. I often think of this as, regarding staff augmentation as being a capacity thing. So maybe existing in that SMB mid-market space. Maybe you're partitioning it such that you don't want your highest value customers, working with potentially, onshore, near offshore, offshore sort of options. So maybe it's SMB or mid-market play. You could partner, like I said on the last slide, white label is a very ubiquitous thing. When I say appeal of partnerships, it's kind of just, I think, how I think of it in terms of ZoomInfo's business. I think that's a mid-level appeal. I think it's easy to execute. It's tough to monetize because, as I said, there's no real reseller element to it. I think it creates a solid quality experience when done right. And it can scale really quickly, and it can scale up and obviously wind down, which is what I mentioned prior. On the next one, you've got DMRs. These are direct market resellers. Newegg is a good example of this. There's a website there. And they kind of function largely like a retailer, right? And they can be a nice play for new customer acquisition, right? It's a place where you go to the website, you can search a software, you can literally click on a software, add it to your cart, pay for it, get a license key, boot the thing up, and you're off and running. This tends to be sort of most common, I think, for solutions that are really lightweight. As I said, they're turnkey. Maybe they have a very robust onboarding wizard. There's maybe not a lot of nuance in the configuration and setup. So this is where direct market retailers tend to be a nice play. Moving up to the right, VARs or value-added resellers, right? So here, customers and prospects can buy direct, like with Newegg, but these folks also tend to offer a solutions kind of consulting approach, right? They're kind of helping a buyer think about the broader problem and solution set. So there's usually a products and light services combo going on here, and CDW are actually a good example of a VAR. Probably also worth noting that you don't tend to see these types of partners, VARs, pop up in like ERP implementation plays, right? So probably you don't see a ton of Workday, ADP, Salesforce type implementations running through VARs. Typically, VAR engagements tend to be more use case specific. Now, both of those that I mentioned can check the lead gen box actually and can be operationalized in a number of ways. So for example, your company could be the one that transacts, right? And CDW, as an example of a VAR, gets some type of kickback off of that transaction. Or you could orchestrate a buy-sell model wherein they buy from you and they resell higher. Or you could run sort of what's called a badged reseller model. Motorola is actually a good example of this one, where the partner works on behalf of the company, and it's they are basically a third-party commissioned rep, essentially. All right, if we move further to the right, you've got SIs, right? System integrators or consultancies, right? These folks tend to offer full cycle. They can run from vendor analysis through to recommendation, through to implementation, deployment, training. When we think about customer mix here, it's full spectrum. It tends to be correlated to the size of the SI, but not always. Obviously someone like Accenture that I've got on the screen here, or Deloitte or IBM, have entire branches of their business that is dedicated to a particular practice, right? On a slightly smaller scale, you do still have smaller scale SIs and consultancies. I mean, I remember back in 2005, prior to Salesforce taking over the entire world, I actually worked as a consultant around enterprise CRM and ERPs. And there were folks like Blue Wolf, Cloud Sherpas, Acumen Solutions, who were all really successful SIs doing great work. All three of which at this point, I think, have been acquired by either IBM or Accenture or Salesforce. But nonetheless, an example of you can go massive with an Accenture, but there are absolutely SIs and consultancies out there that are smaller that will do full life cycle things or pieces of it. And then all the way on the right, you've got OEMs. This is kind of the term OEM kind of, I think, actually originates from sort of the automobile parts industry, where it's like original equipment manufacturer. I'm not going to go into these a ton really, as they tend to be relevant only when you're at a fairly large level of scale. But I've got Salesforce up on screen here for the Salesforce example. In the Salesforce cloud, the term OEM is used, when a specific version of the software is associated with like a piece of hardware. So, and that's the original equipment part. So, developers have the option to sell apps directly to customers that kind of embed into Salesforce or sold with Salesforce. So again, I don't think it's the most ubiquitous avenue for many folks. But it's worth mentioning it is a partnership channel. So it's up on the slide. Kicking over to this sort of piece here, I've just highlighted a few examples of partner types, some key considerations. I now actually want to spend a few minutes walking through a basic framework for evaluating a partner option. And super loosely, I've broken out into 5 categories, and you can see that there's a continuum, right, or a spectrum associated with each of these, right? And the 5 are reach, sales efficiency, customer mix, ownership, and positioning, right? And essentially, in each case, what we're asking ourselves is the question, why wouldn't we just do this ourselves? Which is always the case with partnerships. So if I start off with the two most important, reach, right? So reach, a fairly simple guiding principle, right? But super important. You're essentially thinking about whether the partner route will lead to additional customers and revenue without cannibalization as a byproduct. Some elements to consider, within this reach category might be company size and industry, right? So does the partner angle give you better access into a lower penetrated combination of one or many of those areas? Another one could be buying approach, right? So does the partner angle give you greater exposure to maybe channel driven buyers, right? The next one I think is probably a super obvious one, but geography, right? Does the partner angle give you better access into lower penetrated geographical markets, right? And then finally, I think about those things: company size, buying approach, geography. There are probably more, but ultimately I think that the goal is to select partners and apply fencing to optimize for incremental reach, right? So for example, I won't introduce a partner if I'm thinking about geography as geographic reach is my play. I am not going to introduce a partner to my most saturated and penetrated geographic market, right? Because that's not incremental. And it's not, we'll see later, it's not going to be sales efficient. It's not incremental. So it doesn't match, it doesn't kind of check the reach box, right? I'm probably going to say, okay, where do I have less geographic capability or resourcing or brand presence? And I want to deploy the partner there, right? So that's how I think about reach. Next up is sales efficiency. So, honestly, sales efficiency, I think you can summarize it in a sentence, right? Which is basically taking a non-efficient approach to non-incremental customers sucks, simply put, right? Any transaction is going to have an efficiency associated with it. The badged reseller motion, actually, we touched upon earlier, is an example, right? There's a commission associated with that model, and that directly affects the sales efficiency, right? So if it's non-incremental, why would I accept a less efficient sale, right? Well, there are instances, maybe you want to point your your resources elsewhere to seize a particular opportunity wherein that opportunity has a tremendous ROI, so you don't mind taking a less efficient sale in another area. So there's definitely nuance, but again, very simply put, if it's non-incremental, why am I accepting a less efficient sale? Now, for those that want to get into kind of the nitty-gritty quantitative detail, here are some things that you might consider when running a cost of sale comparison, right? So there are two angles. There's an internal perspective and there's an external perspective. So from an internal perspective, the various degrees of cost loading is what you might be thinking about. So there's a per sale, right, component. So that's the cost of completing one more sale. There's the per scaled investment, which is the cost associated with scaling your own sales capacity, right, if you need to. And then there's the per full org element, which is the fully loaded cost of sales, right? That's marketing, inclusion, lead gen, all that sort of stuff. So those are some of like the internal degrees of cost loading. There's also the external perspective, which is the second one of the two. And there you're kind of thinking economic models, degrees of payout. So, in terms of like a cost model, say, you're thinking about what does the revenue share look like, right? Because that is your top line haircut. Right? Like, what does the expense piece look like, right? Is it fixed per customer or is it a percentage of the sale? So those are some things to think about as you're kind of doing that, that cost of sale comparison. And with all of that said, the thing to remember just ultimately is you want to weigh your trade-offs, right? Growth versus efficiency, top line versus gross margin, right? That's how you should think about the sales efficiency piece. Now, as I mentioned, there are some smaller text at the top of the slide there, and I say that reach and sales efficiency really should be your top two considerations, and that is true. But there are a few others here to evaluate that I'm going to mention, which is, first up here is customer mix. So, by using a partner, you're thinking, what are the implications upon the customer mix and the performance metrics associated with a shift or a deepening of that particular mix, right? One component of customer mix might be ASP, right? Is it affecting your ASP blend? Is it affecting another component is gross margin, right? Like, is it affecting your blend or customer mix on gross margin? And that needs to be inclusive of the partner expense, right? Another one is retention, dollar retention, logo retention. Is it affecting your blend there? NPS, does it affect that? Efficiency to serve ongoing customers, right? Segment penetration is another one, right? Does it affect your blend of which segments you're most penetrated? And then a last one that's probably worth mentioning is, if you have ancillary products, right? So you might have your core platform and then some add-ons, right? But when you think about non-core products, like are the customers that the partner is kind of giving you better access to potentially, or better presence with, are those customers buying more ancillary products, right? Is there a particular kind of profile there? So is it affecting your ancillary product sell-through rates, right? So these are all things to consider when you're thinking about the customer mix. Next up is ownership. And honestly, that's a fairly simple one. How much control do you want to retain, right? And that can usually be correlated to the stage that things are handed off to the partner, where that partner is introduced, right? So pre-sale, right? You're kind of thinking fit evaluation, the pitch, the initial education on the product, the sales stage where is the partner going to be transacting, and then the post-sale piece where obviously implementation, the renewal motion, ongoing support potentially, right? How is the partner involved there? So how much control you want to retain and ownership over any of those stages and the functions kind of contained there within is another consideration for fit. And then finally, positioning, right? And I think questions to ask when you're thinking about positioning are, how does the partner try to position us? How well do they execute against how well we would do it? What is the degree of price transparency required, right? So you're thinking about those things and you're being mindful of how that impacts your market perception, right? So if your product is, let's say, positioned as a premium ERP, high price point, high complexity solution that's a segment leader, is the direct market reseller angle matching that brand perception or cachet that you're trying to create, right? Or are you trying to be a super lightweight, low resource commitment, turnkey type solution where you buy on a Monday, you're up and running and seeing value by Wednesday, right? in those cases, maybe a direct market reseller or a value add reseller, maybe those will work actually really nicely in those plays. So it kind of depends on what your positioning and branding is and how a partner might impact that, right? As we kind of go beyond this, I can't see any of the faces in the room. Hopefully there are some faces in the room. I hope that this deep dive into the evaluation methodologies hasn't rendered you all totally comatose, and I'm going to interpret the silence as evidence of everyone's resounding excitement and fervor at this point. But with all of the frameworks out of the way, I'm going to get onto the part where the rubber meets the road and how might one actually get started on establishing a partnership. So again, 5 phases. You've got kind of selection, right? Identifying an outline and defining the partner guidelines, right? Which is what we talked about earlier, right? Like what are the sort of the partner types that meet our need based on fit and maturity, right? Get some outbound communication going, start interviewing prospects that fit. Adoption, right? You've got to, once you pick someone, you've got to sort of get to the enablement, right? Training, certification of their resources. You can do that with lunch and learns, demo environments, making sure that the business alignment and goals are kind of really well defined, and then providing the guidelines, expectations, right? SLAs, OLAs, right? What's the quality expectation and result expectation from the partner being involved? Defining scope. So again, how much ownership do you want? What do you want them to do? Is there a cohort or a vertical or a segment or geography or an industry you want to target? So scope definition, then launch, right? So partnership announcement, official launch, and then the growth stage, right? So, adding and expanding partner capabilities, deepening sort of, their workload. And maybe honestly, a lot of times you'll have like a partner manager, right? Who's kind of managing the relationship, the performance of the relationship to help scale and grow it as needed. So those are kind of just, I think, a loose way of thinking about how you would leg into sort of establishing a partner program. When I think about, sort of what we've covered so far, we've talked about why we need partners, the partner types, the frameworks for evaluating the fit and the alignment, and then some steps around how to get the motion going, which was that last slide. But on this slide here, we've got my standard plug for being data-driven, right? Which, if any of you have had the misfortune of hearing me speak before, you'll know is something I really harp on, right? Being data-driven. So in this particular instance, I'm suggesting 3 things as helpful principles, right? Delineating the SLAs and the success metrics, creating a uniform time frame for sort of your experiment, and then choosing a fixed cohort for the experiment, right? So you're kind of keeping the variables constant. So what could be a real-world example here? So let's say the metric we're trying to impact is adoption, right? We want to try and boost adoption by a certain percentage across a certain cohort. So we're not just going to hand over a whole load of customers willy-nilly for this partner experiment, right? We're going to try and pick a cohort where the risk of any negative impact or fallout is low should the whole thing go horribly wrong. So, let's say you're working with a systems integrator or a consultancy type situation. Maybe there's a cohort of customers who are joint customers, right? So ones for whom the partner has done work with previously and where they're also a current customer of yours, right? So it's a low risk cohort. There's a double relationship going on there. So we're going to select accounts with low usage, we've talked about, where the cohort is predicated by joint customer status, okay? And we're going to measure impact on adoption metrics, and we're going to do it over the course of 90 days. So you've kind of met the criteria, right? You've delineated what you're looking to impact, the cohort you're looking to try it with, which is low risk initially, and you've set a time parameter. So, if the results are positive coming out of that, you can expand some of these parameters. You can expand further into the existing cohort, or you can broaden the scope of the target group to maybe include non-joint customers, right? Where you're introducing that partner to new relationships. So hopefully that's just kind of a reminder for everyone that, take a measured data-centric approach to partnerships. It's really important. So this, I think, takes us onto, our last slide here, which is, once you've established a partnership that is demonstrating value, how do you continue to deepen the interlock, drive continued engagement, I'm not going to read through all of the points on the slide because you can all read as fast as I can talk, but just a few thoughts to call out. I think, marketing enablement, sales enablement, and events, just an easy way of grouping it. I think the thing we see a lot, LinkedIn, right? Social media mentions, blogs, guest posts. You see a lot of blogs out there with guest speakers from different partners and companies. Case studies is a really old school method. Webinars. On the sales enablement side, co-branded collateral, right? That's a big one. Co-branded press releases. You can have mentions in kind of customer newsletters, and you can sort of enable your sellers through kind of partner enablement, right? You can equip and enable your sales team to be really well versed on sort of the partner network and what's being offered, so they can talk about it as part of the pre-sale motion. And then finally, events, right? I mean, this is, joint demo days. You can do user groups. You can have like an industry conference, which is obviously not something that's been super prevalent for the last year or so, but nonetheless, something that I think is well used. Lunch and learns. That's a really good one, honestly. I love that one. It's really simple. So those are some ways that you can kind of continue to drive that engagement, across your partner network. So I've been talking for 26 minutes at this point, and that brings us kind of to the end of this, I think fairly high level light exploration of the world of partners, how to think about that evaluation, how to be data driven, honestly, and how you could sort of try and kick it off. So, at this point, I think we've got maybe 3 or 4 minutes. I'm not sure if there are questions. We can, I'm happy to take questions now. I'm also happy to sort of, if you want to kind of contact me through LinkedIn, happy to kind of connect that way as well. So I'll wait a second to see if there's anything that we'd like to cover. And then after that, I'll turn it back over to Matt and the Chanzira crew. All right, Matt, I think we're all set.